you, Dennis. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sloan Dawson. I work for Sound Transit, and I'm working with the team that's thinking about station planning as part of this project. Which is, sorry, can you? Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. My name is Sloan Dawson. I work for Sound Transit, and I'm working with the team that's thinking about station planning. So that includes a number of things I've got to kind of... Still louder. Louder.
Turn it up. There you go.
Take it out.
How's this? All right. Sloan Dawson, station planning. That's my role in the project. So I'm going to walk through just some brief overview slides that talk about station planning and how we're approaching it within this project. This is a big project. It's connecting a lot of different places in the city, a range of contexts. We have the downtown core, of course, is a component of the project, where the city's kind of densest areas and highest pockets of employment are, where we're looking at a tunnel, essentially, thinking about how stations are popping up into existing buildings and potentially new buildings that are part of this dense urban environment downtown. We have industrial districts that the project serves. Industrial districts that have active working uses, where there's an opportunity with stations that serve these areas to connect people with jobs, but where there are a lot of concerns about protecting those industrial land uses over time. We have the urban villages like the Junction and Ballard, which are mixed use in character, are growing and developing even further, and are likely to grow even more in the time between now and when the project comes online. And so in urban villages, the challenge is really thinking about how do we balance the character of communities with that capacity and that kind of policy goal for growth when served by transit. And we have a lot of residential neighborhoods, like Delridge, like Avalon, where we really have to think about how the project and its design and its alignment interface in terms of the activity levels and such with these neighborhoods. So that's really kind of the range of different place types, many different place types that the project is serving. Of course, the street and the right-of-way conditions are influenced by the character and the density of these communities. So, as we think, we need to think about how freight routes are serving these industrial areas, and that where our alignment and our investments are interfacing with streets, that we're preserving kind of the throughput of these freight modes. We are also intersecting with transit corridors that serve urban villages and connect downtown, urban villages, and residential neighborhoods to one another. So really making sure that these corridors are interfacing with the investments that we're making. Bikeways and greenways connect all these different place types together and provide even greater mobility and options for access into station areas. So light rail introduces a major change in this picture. It's introducing new high-capacity service that's more reliable, more frequent, and it's also a major fixed infrastructure investment in communities. So we really need to think about how light rail interfaces with and supports industrial land uses and mobility patterns. Similarly, we need to think about how it interfaces with and supports the downtown core and the tunnel and these kind of opportunities for integrating our stations into development. Also need to think about how it's interfacing with urban villages. So coming in and kind of setting off new development opportunities while kind of honoring the neighborhood character and making sure that there are ample connections from a variety of modes into the station. And then, of course, then how do neighborhoods relate to light rail in terms of the connections that are possible, and then ensuring that the design of the infrastructure is supportive of character. So what this all adds up to is the light rail stations really become a community hub. And it's really our goal to make sure that this functions as a positive community hub and we can really think about all of these complementary investments that are made to really facilitate and support this idea of light rail as a community hub. So part of thinking about it as a hub is thinking about it through these kind of building blocks. And so as we think about station planning, we see one critical component as planning good integration between transit service, so buses, other kind of high throughput modes like TNCs like Uber and Lyft, paratransit. So really making sure that the stations accommodate efficient circulation and access from these modes into light rail. Similarly, thinking about how bicycling and walking interface with this. Of course, safety is a major concern for bicycles and pedestrians, and making sure that there are safe approaches into the station. These different circulation patterns and kind of desires of how a bus wants adequate turning radius and how pedestrians and cyclists want safe approaches to the station. These patterns start to inform, or when we overlay them, they start to inform the layout of the station. So that's where we start to think about, essentially a transfer zone. So where people are alighting from buses and getting into the light rail station, or when they're biking from a major adjacent destination like a school. What are those kind of safe routes and approaches into the station? And as we start to lay out the circulation patterns and start to see how the station itself needs to lay out, that's where we can start to identify what the actual physical form or urban design of it looks like. So that's where the idea of public space and kind of plazas, where drop-off happens, kind of these more intense activity zones associated with the station, and how those activity zones kind of transfer, bleed into the environment surrounding it. And then, of course, future development. So thinking about how the location of the station is accommodating opportunities for growth and new development, while preserving the existing character. This really gives a kind of a high-level overview of the different layers of thinking that go into station location and kind of design configuration. And we're really doing this work earlier than we've ever done it before as part of the alternatives development process, so we can really see and understand the opportunities and the challenges associated with station locations. And when we select or identify, I should say, a preferred alternative, the board selects identify as a preferred alternative, that we're pretty confident that the station is going to work, and that there's broad kind of buy-in to a vision for what that station looks like. So that's a high-level overview from me. I think I'll turn it over to Stephen, yes, to walk through the specific alternatives.
Thank you, Sloan. So what you see here is a map with very similar to the one on the table, which you will have for your discussion later in the second section. These are the level 1 alternatives that are developed based on the early scoping comment that we heard. And I'm going to go through each one of these alternatives with you right now. Once again, the first one is the starting point, which is the Sound Transit 3 representative project alignment. It departs Soto Station elevated, crossing over Spokane Street Bridge, along the south side of West Seattle Bridge elevated, crossing Duwamish with a high-level fixed bridge. And getting into Delridge with an elevated Delridge station, continues south on Delridge, turning west on Genesee, again on the elevated structure. And then arriving in the Avalon station with the elevated station, continue elevated on Fort Roy, turning into Alaska, having a station in Alaska and 41st, 42nd area. So this is the Sound Transit 3 representative project, which is the starting point. This next alternative is the Pigeon Ridge West Seattle Tunnel, as shown in the blue line here. The gray line that you see here is the Sound Transit 3 representative project, just for comparison and for reference. And again, departing Soto Station elevated, this time we cross the Spokane Street Bridge, continue further south, making a turn westward, and crossing the Duwamish River in a further south configuration without touching the harbor island. And then, again, high-level fixed span bridge over the Duwamish crossing. Oh, sure. Oh, that red, okay. That helps. So this is the Duwamish, yeah. And then over here, we are tunneled into the ridge of the Pigeon Point. As it comes out, it would have an elevated station in the intersection of Genesee and Dowridge, straddle over the Dowridge station, and then continue westward on the north edge of the West Seattle Golf Course, and then enter into another tunnel portal just east of 35th. With a tunnel station in Avalon, continue tunnel underneath Alaska Junction and arriving into tunnel Alaska Junction station on 42nd Avenue Southwest and Alaska Street. Again, orienting north-south for the future extension to the south. Oops. Okay, next is the blue line. This is the West Seattle Bridge Fauntleroy alternative. It again departs Soto Station, elevated, but this time it crosses the Duwamish River on the north side of the West Seattle Bridge passing over the terminal, again with high-level fixed span bridge crossing the waterways, arriving into the peninsula, having an elevated Dowridge station sandwiched between the Terminal 5 to the north and West Seattle Bridge and New Course Steel to the south. Continue westward using the West Seattle Bridge and Fauntleroy corridor, elevated, having an elevated station in Avalon in this vicinity here. Continue elevated and having the Junction station and the north-south orientation in the vicinity of the 38th Avenue Southwest. Again, orient north-south, getting ready for the future extension to the south. The next alternative is called the Yancy Street West Seattle Tunnel, represented by the pink line over here. Similar to the last alternative that you see, crossing the Duwamish River on the north side, arriving in the peninsula, but this time it go over, elevated over the West Seattle Bridge, Dowridge interchange off-ramp, passes over New Course Steel parking lot here, and getting into an elevated station in the vicinity of Yancy Street and Avalon Way, getting into a tunnel underneath Alaska Junction and getting into a tunnel station in Alaska Junction in orientation of north-south in Fauntleroy and Alaska Street. One thing to note is that this alternative has two stations. It consolidated the Avalon and Dowridge station into a station in the Yancy Street area. This next alignment is the Oregon Street Alaska Junction, represented in the orange line. Similar to the last two alternative that you see crossing the Duwamish on the north side, is the same. Also crossing over the ramps on the West Seattle Bridge, arriving into Dowridge with an elevated station further south than the Sound Transit 3 representative project. It then turned westward on Genesee, again elevated, very similar to Sound Transit 3 project, elevated station on Avalon. But instead of using the Fauntleroy and Alaska as the corridor, it uses Oregon and 44th Avenue Southwest as the corridor, which is one block north and one block west of the Alaska Junction of California and Alaska Street. This next alternative is the West Seattle Golf Course Alaska Junction alignment. And again, departing Soto Station, very much like the Sound Transit 3 representative alignment, crossing the Duwamish Waterway on the south side of the West Seattle Bridge, getting into Dowridge, again having a Dowridge station further south than the Sound Transit 3 representative project. But instead of using the Genesee corridor, it uses the West Seattle Golf Course land and enter into a tunnel in the vicinity of the 35th and Alaska, and having a station, underground station, on Alaska Street between Fauntleroy and 40th Avenue Southwest, and then have a tail tractor turn to move for the extension to the south in the future. Once again, this alternative has two stations. It eliminated the Avalon station. So in summary, this is all the different alignment that's showing on this map here, which we'll be using this for your discussion in the next section. In a quick summary, There's 3 options that you can cross the Warmish River, one on the north side of West Yellow Bridge, one on the south of West Yellow Bridge, one is further south that doesn't touch Harbor Island. Once you get into the peninsula, you have different options that coming from connecting directly to Alaska Junction. We have the West Yellow Bridge Fort Roy corridor, we got the Yancy Street corridor, we've got the Genesee Street corridor, and the West Yellow Golf Course corridor. And for the Alaska Junction station, you have a lot of options here with elevated and underground options, some close to the junction, some a little bit further away from the junction. So in the next session, we're going to hear from you of your input on this alternative and your ideas on how better to refine them. Thank you, and back to Dennis.
Great. Well, before you jump in there, I appreciate the eagerness, but let me just cover a couple things. So just like we had in the first time, we do have a small group discussion up here, as well as in your agenda, and we're going to be asking you about what opportunities do you see with these particular alternatives, what are your concerns, and then how do these fit with the conversation you just finished earlier this morning. So one thing just to note, we will give about half an hour for this particular presentation, or conversation I should say, and then we will kind of get everybody back together for one final kind of report out and just what the next steps are. So thanks again for your interest, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to the table.